Hi there. Tonight we step into the gaslit streets of Victorian England, where you're an unmarried woman, a spinster, and the whispers around you carry a strange mix of pity and fear. Picture yourself in a bustling London square, your bonnet shielding you from drizzle, the air thick with coal smoke and the clatter of horse-drawn cabs. You're clutching a worn parasol, dodging the stares of matrons who see you as a puzzle or a threat. Being single here isn't just a choice, it's a social crime, and you probably won't survive the gossip without a thick skin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. I love imagining you all tucked in worldwide. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in your late 20s, past the bloom of youth by Victorian standards, and the label spinster clings to you like damp wool. The term stings, conjuring images of lonely knitting and cats, but it's more than a joke. It marks you as an outsider in a society obsessed with marriage. You live in a modest boarding house, your room sparse but tidy, and every day you navigate a world that sees your independence as unnatural. The baker's wife, Mrs. Hodges, eyes you warily as you buy your daily loaf, her smile tight. "Still no ring, dear?" she asks, as if you've misplaced it in your reticule. You bite back a retort, maybe something about her stale buns, and nod politely, but the judgment lingers. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, marriage was the cornerstone of social order, with over 90% of women wed by their 30s, as census data from the 1850s shows. Unmarried women like you were anomalies, disrupting a system where families relied on husbands for status and survival. You're not rich. Your father, a clerk, left you a small annuity, but you're not destitute either. Still, society expects you to wed, produce heirs, and uphold the domestic ideal. Your refusal or inability to do so makes you a curiosity, a glitch in the machine. You feel it every time you pass a church, its bells ringing for yet another wedding. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorians believed spinsters emitted a literal miasma of discontent, as if your single status could sour the air like bad milk. You overheard Mrs. Hodges muttering about it at market, claiming your presence near her stall might turn the cream. You almost laughed, picturing yourself as a walking curse, spoiling dairy with a glance. If only I could curdle her gossip, you think, adjusting your bonnet. It's absurd, but these superstitions fuel the fear that you're not just odd, you're dangerous, a woman who defies God's plan. Historians still argue whether spinsters were genuinely feared or merely pitied in Victorian society. Some say you were seen as threats, destabilizing the patriarchal order by living outside male control. Others argue the era's obsession with charity painted you as tragic, deserving of sympathy rather than dread. You feel both currents, Mrs. Hodges's snide remarks cut, but the church's benevolent sewing circle, always inviting you to join their pitying ranks, feels just as stifling. You're neither a villain nor a victim, just a woman trying to carve out a life. But the village, no, the whole of England, seems determined to label you otherwise. You turn down a cobbled lane, the gas lamps flickering to life as dusk settles. Your boots click on the stones and you pass a young couple, their heads bent close, oblivious to you. You don't envy them, not exactly, but you're tired of the stares, the whispers, the assumption that your life is incomplete. You've got your books, your small savings, and a stubborn streak that keeps you going. Tomorrow, you'll face the same scrutiny, Mrs. Hodges, the church, the neighbours, but for now, you're just you, a spinster, in a world that doesn't know what to make of you, walking home under a sky heavy with stars. You're sitting in the cramped parlour of your boarding house, the wallpaper peeling at the edges, a tepid cup of tea cooling in your hands. The clock ticks loudly, and outside, the London street hums with vendors and the clop of hooves. You're 28, unmarried, and the weight of Victorian society's marriage obsession presses on you like a too-tight corset. Your landlady, Mrs. Pritchard, bustles in, her eyes gleaming with gossip about a neighbour's engagement. "You'll find a match soon, dear," she says, but her tone suggests you're running out of time. You smile thinly, stirring your tea, and think, if I hear spinster one more time, I'll fling this cup at the wall. The pressure to wed is relentless, and dodging it makes you a puzzle, maybe even a threat. Marriage isn't just a milestone here, it's a mandate. You're surrounded by women planning weddings, their lives orbiting husbands and babies, while you're still charting your own course. Your friend Clara, once your confidant, now sends letters gushing about her betrothed, a banker with a moustache, like a broom. You're happy for her, but her pitying postscripts, "You'll meet someone," sting. The city's matchmaking machine churns on. Tea parties, balls, even church socials, all designed to pair you off. You've attended a few. Your dress carefully mended, but the men's appraising glances and the matron's whispers make you feel like a horse at auction. You'd rather stay home with a novel than endure another suitable introduction. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, the marriage rate peaked in the mid-19th century, with women expected to wed by their early 20s to secure economic and social stability. The 1851 census showed a surplus of women, about 500,000 more than men, making competition fierce and leaving many, like you, unmarried. You're not alone, but that doesn't ease the scrutiny. Your small annuity keeps you afloat, but society assumes you're incomplete without a husband. Refusing to play the game, skipping dances or dodging suitors, marks you as defiant, a woman who might unravel the neat order of family life. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorian matchmakers used marriage bureaus, early dating agencies, to pair spinsters with bachelors, advertising in newspapers like the Matrimonial News. You found a crumpled ad in Mrs. Pritchard's parlour, promising discreet unions for respectable ladies. You laughed, imagining yourself described as plain but thrifty, fond of books. "They'd pair me with a goat farmer," you mutter, tossing the ad into the fire. The idea's tempting for a moment, someone else solving your problem, but you'd rather face Mrs. Pritchard's nagging than trust a stranger's ledger. Historians still argue whether the marriage craze oppressed women like you or offered a flawed kind of agency. Some say the pressure to wed trapped you in a cycle of dependence, your worth tied to a ring. Others argue courtship gave you leverage, letting you negotiate matches or delay them with charm. You feel the trap more than the power. Clara's letters, Mrs. Pritchard's hints, the church's endless sermons on domestic duty, they all scream that your single life is a failure. Yet you're not ready to surrender your quiet evenings, your books, your small freedoms, not even for a banker. With a broom moustache, you set the teacup down, the porcelain clinking softly, and glance out the window. A young woman hurries past, her arm linked with a man's, her laughter bright. You don't resent her, but you're tired of being the odd one out, the spinster who must be so lonely. You're not, or not always. You've got plans. Maybe a job as a typist, maybe a trip to the seaside. For now you rise, smoothing your skirt, and head to your room, the boarding house creaking around you. Tomorrow you'll face more questions, more pity, but you'll keep dodging, your heart stubborn, your path your own. You're weaving through a crowded London street, your boots splashing in puddles as you clutch a parcel of mended lace for a seamstress. The air is heavy with coal dust and the sharp tang of horse dung, and you keep your head down, avoiding the stares of passers-by. You're an unmarried woman, a spinster, and Victorian society doesn't just pity you, it suspects you. Whispers trail you like shadows, painting you as a temptress, a disruptor of the sacred family unit. A shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Gale, nods curtly as you pass her store, her eyes narrowing as if you might seduce her husband over a bolt of calico. You roll your eyes, thinking, if I'm a siren, my song's a yawn, but the fear is real. Your single status makes you a moral hazard in their eyes. The Victorian obsession with family is a fortress, and you're outside its walls. Married women guard their husbands, fathers watch their sons, all wary of you. A woman unchained by a man's name. You felt it at church, where matrons clutch their hymnals tighter when you sit nearby, or at market, where a grocer once joked, "Mind you don't steal my lad's heart." You laughed, but it stung. You're no femme fatale, just a woman, scraping by on your annuity and odd jobs, yet the label spinster paints you as a threat to domestic bliss. You adjust your bonnet, muttering, "If I'm dangerous, it's only to their boring tea parties." Here's a mainstream fact. Victorian morality, rooted in evangelical Christianity, idealized the family as society's foundation, with women as angels of the hearth. Unmarried women like you who didn't fit this mold were seen as potential corruptors, tempting men from their duties. The 1860s saw moral panics over loose women, though spinsters weren't prostitutes. Your independence alone was enough to spark unease. You're not flirting with anyone, but your existence, free of a husband's oversight, challenges the idea that women belong in the home. It's why Mrs. Gale's glance feels like a warning shot. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorians believed spinsters could bewitch men with their gaze, a superstition tied to old folklore about unmarried women's evil eye. You overheard a maid at the boarding house whisper that your habit of reading late by candlelight might hex a suitor. You nearly choked on your tea, picturing yourself glaring at Mrs. Gale's husband until he swoons. If only I could hex her into silence, you think, smirking as you dodge a cart. It's nonsense, but it fuels the myth that you're not just single, you're a walking spell, ready to unravel a man's virtue. Historians still argue whether this fear of spinsters was about moral control or deeper anxieties about social change. Some say it was a way to police women, keeping you tethered to marriage or shame. Others argue it reflected unease about industrialization, which gave women, like you, new roles outside the home. You feel the control more than the context. Mrs. Gale's stare, the grocer's jest, they're not just personal. They're part of a system that wants you wed or invisible. You're neither, and that defiance, quiet as it is, makes you a target. You clutch your parcel tighter, your knuckles white, and keep walking. You turn onto a quieter lane, the clamour of the street fading. A young mother hurries past, her toddler in tow, and you catch her quick glance. Pity, maybe, but laced with something sharper. You're used to it now, the way your independence unsettles people. You're not out to steal husbands or curse families. You just want to pay your rent, read your novels, maybe dream of a life beyond this city's judgment. The lace in your parcel is due by noon, and you'll collect a few shillings, enough for bread and coal. For now, you're a spinster, feared for what you represent, but you're also you, stubborn, solitary, and very much alive. You're perched on a creaky chair in your boarding house room, the single window letting in a sliver of grey London light. Your fingers ache from hours of stitching lace, a side job to stretch your meagre annuity. The air smells of damp plaster, and the faint lavender you sprinkle on your linens, but your mind is on survival, specifically how hard it is as an unmarried woman in Victorian England. Without a husband's income, you're an economic outcast, scraping by while society whispers you're a burden, or worse, a threat for daring to fend for yourself. You pause, rubbing your hands, and mutter, "If I'm a burden, someone tell Mrs. Pritchard to lower the rent." The struggle is real, and it's why spinsters like you are feared. You're proof the system doesn't always win. Every shilling counts, and you're meticulous, budgeting for coal, bread, and the occasional mending needle. Your room is sparse, a bed, a chair, a shelf of worn books. But it's yours, a small defiance against a world that expects you wed and supported. The grocer, Mr. Tate, raises an eyebrow when you haggle over carrots, as if a single woman shouldn't
care about pence. You do fiercely because there's no one else to lean on.
You've thought about work, maybe as a governess or typist, but those jobs come with their own suspicions, and you're already dodging Mrs. Gale's glares from the market. You sigh, thinking, if I starve, I'll haunt her stall first. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, economic dependence on men was the norm, with most women relying on fathers or husbands for financial security. The 1851 census showed about 2 million unmarried women, many struggling as wages for female labour, like your lacework, were a fraction of men's, often less than 10 shillings a week. You earn just enough to cover rent and basics, but illness or a bad month could tip you into poverty. Society fears you not just for your independence, but because you expose its cracks. Women like you, surviving alone, challenge the idea that marriage is every woman's salvation. Now for the quirky tidbit, some spinsters turn to fancy work, like embroidering bookmarks or knitting lace, selling them through discreet networks to avoid charity's stigma. You've joined one, passing your lace to a middlewoman who supplies shops, her wink promising secrecy. It's not much, but it's yours, and you imagine Mrs. Pritchard gasping if she knew. A spinster with a trade? Scandalous. You chuckle, picturing her clutching her teapot in horror. The work keeps you afloat, but it's also a quiet rebellion, a way to dodge the pitying arms of church ladies. Historians still argue whether economic hardship made spinsters objects of fear or sympathy. Some say your struggle fueled distrust, as self-reliant women threatened patriarchal control. Others argue society pitied you, offering charity to nudge you back into proper roles. You feel the distrust more, Mr. Tate's raised brow, Mrs. Pritchard's hints that a husband would fix your finances. Charities know better. The church's aid comes with sermons on humility, as if poverty's your fault. You'd rather stitch until your fingers bleed than beg for their scraps. Your annuity, small as it is, and your lacework are your lifelines, fragile but proud. You light a candle, the flame flickering as you return to your stitching. Outside, the city hums, cabs
rattling, voices calling, but your world is this room, this needle, this fight to stay afloat.
You think of Clara, now married and comfortable, her letters full of domestic bliss. You don't envy her, not really, but you're tired of the assumption that you're failing without a man, you're surviving, and that's enough, even if it scares the Mrs. Gales of the world. You prick your finger, curse softly, and keep sewing, the rhythm grounding you as the night deepens, your independence a quiet, stubborn flame. You're hurrying through a foggy London alley, your shawl drawn tight against the damp chill, the cobblestones slick under your worn boots. The air carries the sour tang of coal smoke and rotting refuse, and you're clutching a bundle of mended stockings to deliver to a laundress. As an unmarried woman, you're used to sideways glances, but there's a darker edge to the whispers trailing you today. Hints of superstition, as if your spinsterhood makes you unnatural, maybe even witchy. A street urchin darts past, shouting, "Old maid's curse!" before vanishing into the mist. You roll your eyes, muttering, "If I had a curse, I'd use it on Mrs. Pritchard's leaky roof." But the accusation stings, tying you to old fears that cast single women as threats to Victorian order. Superstition clings to spinsters like you, fueled by a society uneasy with anyone who defies the marriage mould. You've heard the tales at market. Unmarried women blamed for sour milk or sick livestock, their solitude seen as a rejection of God's plan. Mrs. Hodges, the baker's wife from your first days here, once crossed herself when you lingered too long at her stall, as if your shadow could spoil her dough. You're no witch, just a woman stitching lace to pay rent, but the rumours paint you as a figure from folklore, a spinster who might hex a happy home. You adjust your bundle, thinking, "If I'm a witch, my spells are terrible at fixing rent." Here's a mainstream fact. Victorian England, despite its industrial progress, was steeped in superstition, with rural and urban communities alike clinging to beliefs about witchcraft and curses. While the 1735 Witchcraft Act ended formal trials, unmarried, women, especially older or eccentric ones, were often scapegoats for misfortune. You're only 28, hardly a crone, but your independence, living alone, working odd jobs, makes you suspect. The church reinforces this with sermons warning against unnatural lives, and you felt the weight of those words in Mrs. Hodges's wary glances, as if your single status could taint the village's moral air. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorians believed spinsters' cats were familiars, demonic pets, channeling their witchy powers. You've got a tabby, Pip, who curls up on your boarding house bed, more interested in crumbs than curses. Mrs. Pritchard once hinted Pip might carry your thoughts to unsuspecting men. You laughed, picturing Pip plotting seduction over a saucer of milk. "If he's a familiar," you whisper, dodging a puddle, "he's the laziest demon in London." The idea's absurd, but it feeds the myth that you're not just single, you're a mystical threat, your cat a partner in crime. Historians still argue whether these witchy whispers were serious accusations or social tools to control women. Some say they reflected genuine fear, tying spinsters to older anxieties about female power. Others argue they were exaggerated, a way to shame you into marriage or conformity. You feel the shame more than the fear. Mrs. Hodges's crossed fingers, the urchin's taunt, they're not burning you at the stake, but they're reminders you don't belong. You're not brewing potions or cursing crops, you're just trying to deliver stockings and afford tea. Yet the superstition lingers, a shadow that makes your solitude feel like a crime. You reach the laundress's door, the fog swirling thicker now, muffling the city's din. You hand over the stockings, collect your pence, and turn back into the alley. Pip's waiting at home, probably napping, and you're tempted to pet him extra just to spite Mrs. Pritchard's nonsense. You're no witch, no curse, just a woman navigating a world that fears what it can't control. The fog curls around you and you walk on, your steps steady, your heart a quiet rebellion against the whispers that try to define you. You're standing in the grand, chilly drawing room of a Kensington townhouse, your hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. You're a governess now, a new job to bolster your dwindling annuity, tasked with teaching two sullen girls, Latin and embroidery. The room smells of polished mahogany and wax, but the air crackles with distrust. The mistress of the house, Mrs. Langley, watches you like a hawk, her lips pursed, as if you might pocket the silver, or worse, charm her husband. As an unmarried woman in Victorian England, your presence in someone else's home sparks suspicion. You're
A spinster, a potential disruptor of domestic harmony.
You adjust your plain grey dress, muttering, "If I'm a threat, it's only to their terrible taste in wallpaper." Working as a governess puts you in a strange limbo, neither servant nor family, always under scrutiny. You're 28, educated. Enough to teach, but your single status makes you a riddle to the Langleys. Mrs. Langley's eyes linger on your modest collar, as if searching for signs of seduction. You've heard the gossip. Governesses, especially unmarried ones, are temptresses luring husbands or unsettling households. You'd laugh if it weren't so exhausting. Mr. Langley, a portly man with a fondness for port, barely notices you, but that doesn't stop his wife's vigilance. You think, if I wanted to ruin this house, I'd start with their daughter's atrocious verb, conjugations. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, governesses were a common occupation for educated but impoverished women, with over 25,000 employed by the 1860s, according to census records. Often single like you, they filled a gap for middle-class families seeking to educate daughters without male tutors' risks. Your job pays a modest £20 a year, enough to keep your boarding house room and Pip's milk, but it comes with a catch. Your independence alarms employers. Mrs. Langley hired you for your Latin, but she fears your freedom. A woman without a husband's tether moving through her home. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorian households insisted governesses use back stairs or eat alone to avoid entangling male family members. Mrs. Langley enforces this, directing you to a narrow staircase that smells of mildew. You comply, but not without a smirk, imagining yourself sneaking into the parlour to steal Mr. Langley's heart over a Latin declension. "Amo amas amat, scandal," you whisper, stifling a giggle as you climb. It's absurd, but the rule reflects the deeper fear. You're an outsider, your spinsterhood, a wild card in their tightly ordered world. Historians still argue whether governesses were feared for their potential influence or pitied for their precarious lives. Some say your role threatened family structures as you wielded authority without male oversight. Others argue society saw you as tragic, trapped in a liminal role with little security. You feel the fear more, Mrs. Langley's sharp glances, the whispered warnings to her daughters to mind Miss Ellis. You're no siren, just a woman conjugating verbs to pay rent, but your presence unsettles her. You wonder if it's your books, your quiet confidence, or simply your refusal to wed that makes you seem so dangerous. You guide the girls through a Latin primer, their sighs louder than their answers. Mrs. Langley hovers nearby, pretending to arrange flowers, her eyes darting to you. You keep your voice steady, correcting a conjugation, but your mind wanders to your old lacework, the foggy alleys, even Mrs. Hodges's witchy whispers. This job is a step up, but the distrust follows you, a spinster's shadow. You think of Pip napping on your bed and smile. His indifference is a comfort no Langley can offer. For now you teach, you endure, and you hold fast to your small, stubborn freedom, a governess in a house that fears what you represent. You're standing awkwardly in the corner of a bustling Mayfair drawing room, the air thick with the scent of beeswax candles and rosewater. It's a charity tea hosted by a local vicar's wife, and you're here because Mrs. Pritchard, your landlady, insisted it'd do you good. Your grey dress, neatly mended, feels drab against the matron's silk gowns, and you clutch a teacup like a shield. As an unmarried woman in Victorian England, you're used to pity. But tonight's social snubs sting sharper. Every glance, every turned shoulder marks you as a spinster, a misfit who dares to defy the marriage norm. You sip your tea, muttering, "If I'm unwelcome, at least the biscuits are free." The rejection is subtle but relentless, and it's why you're feared. You're a living challenge to their world. The room hums with chatter about engagements and babies, and you're invisible unless someone needs a target. Mrs. Carver, a banker's wife, brushes past, her smile freezing when she sees you.
"Oh, Miss Ellis, still alone?" she asks, her voice dripping with false concern. You nod, biting back a quip about her tacky brooch, and she hurries off as if your spinsterhood might rub off. "You're not here to cause trouble, just to
Sip tea and dodge Mrs. Pritchard's nagging, but your presence unsettles them. You're a reminder that not every woman slots neatly into wifehood, and that makes you a quiet kind of threat. Here's a mainstream fact. Victorian social life revolved around rigid hierarchies, with married women holding higher status than spinsters, who were often excluded from elite gathering. By the 1860s, etiquette manuals like Mrs. Beeton's advised hostesses to prioritize respectable matrons, leaving women like you on the fringes, invited only to charity events or as fillers. You're here because the vicar's wife needed extra bodies, but the snubs, Mrs. Carver's cold nod, the empty chairs beside you remind you of your place. Your annuity and governess job keep you from destitution, but they don't buy you a seat at the matron's table. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorian hostesses used seating charts to isolate spinsters, placing them near dull guests or children, to keep them occupied. You notice it tonight. You're wedged between a deaf curate and a fidgety boy who keeps stealing cakes. You imagine Mrs. Carver cackling as she planned it, thinking, "That'll teach the spinster." You smirk, slipping the boy an extra biscuit to quiet him, and whisper, "If this is their trap, I've survived worse." It's petty, but it reinforces the fear. You're an unpredictable element, a woman who might disrupt their carefully curated world. Historians still argue whether social exclusion was meant to punish spinsters or protect societal norms. Some say it was deliberate, a way to pressure you into marriage by making single life miserable. Others argue it was incidental, a byproduct of a culture obsessed with family. You feel the punishment. Mrs. Carver's snub, the curate's droning sermon on duty, it's not just oversight, it's a message to conform or vanish. You don't want their pity or their husband's, just a moment to enjoy your tea without judgment. But your independence, your quiet refusal to wed, makes you a spectre at their feast. You set your teacup down, the porcelain clinking softly, and slip toward the door. The room's warmth feels stifling, the chatter a hum of exclusion. Outside, the night air is cool, the gas lamps casting pools of light on the cobbles. You think of Pip, your tabby, waiting at the boarding house, and the Latin primers you'll teach tomorrow. You're not lonely, not exactly, but you're tired of being the odd one out, the spinster who frightens them by existing. You pull your shawl tighter and walk home, your steps steady, your heart a stubborn spark against their cold shoulders. You're curled up in your boarding house room, the flicker of a single candle casting shadows on the cracked plaster walls. A dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre rests in your lap, its pages a quiet escape from the London drizzle pattering outside. As an unmarried woman in Victorian England, you find solace in novels, but they also remind you of society's fear. You're the spinster, often vilified in stories as a scheming, bitter figure who threatens happy homes. You trace a line in the book, thinking of Mrs. Langley's suspicious glares at the townhouse, and mutter, "If I'm a villain, my plot's just to afford more candles." The literary trope stings, amplifying the dread that your independence makes you a menace. Victorian fiction is a mirror, and it's not kind to women like you. You've read tales where spinsters lurk as jealous aunts or conniving governesses, plotting to steal inheritances or ruin romances. They're not you, just a woman scraping by with governess work and lace mending, but the stories shape how people see you. Mrs. Pritchard, your landlady, once clutched her shawl tighter when you mentioned reading Wuthering Heights, as if you might channel Cathy's wildness. You're no brooding anti-hero, just tired of being cast as one. You flip a page, wishing for a story where a spinster gets to be, well, human. Maybe I'll write one, you whisper, if I don't burn out my eyes first. Here's a mainstream fact. Victorian literature, from Bronte to Dickens, often portrayed unmarried women as threats to social order, reflecting the era's anxiety about spinsters. By the 1860s, novels were cultural touchstones, read aloud in parlours, and their spinster characters, like Miss Havisham in Great Expectations, cemented stereotypes of bitterness or danger. You're not jilted or scheming, but when Mrs. Carver snubbed you at the charity tea, you saw Miss Havisham's shadow in her eyes. These stories don't just entertain, they fuel the fear that you, unbound by marriage, might disrupt the family-centric world they cherish. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorian readers believed spinsters wrote dangerous novels, pouring their unspent passions into subversive plots. You overheard a bookseller joke that women like you penned scandalous tales under pseudonyms, corrupting young readers. You laughed, imagining yourself scribbling a Gothic romance titled The Spinster's Revenge. If only I had the time, you murmur, picturing Mrs. Pritchard fainting at the sight. It's nonsense, but it underscores the myth. Your solitude isn't just pitiful, it's a creative force, potentially unhinging society's moral fabric. Historians still argue whether these literary spinsters shaped public fear or merely reflected it. Some say novels amplified distrust, giving people like Mrs. Langley a script to suspect you. Others argue they were exaggerated, a safe way to explore anxieties about changing gender roles. You feel the script's weight, Mrs. Pritchard's wary glance when you read late, as if your books might summon a Bronte-esque storm. You're not plotting anyone's downfall, just savouring Jane's defiance, but the stereotype makes your quiet hobby feel like a rebellion. You wonder if Mrs. Langley reads the same novels, seeing you in their villainous spinsters. You close Jane Eyre, the candle guttering low, and glance at Pip, your tabby, napping on the bed. He's no literary familiar, just a purring companion who doesn't care about your marital status. The boarding house is quiet, the city's hum muted by rain. You think of the charity tea's snubs, the governor's job suspicions, even Mrs. Hodges's witchy whispers. They all draw from the same well, stories that cast you as a threat for choosing your own path. You blow out the candle, the darkness soft, and settle into bed, your heart steady. You're no novel's villain, just a woman reading her way through a world that fears her freedom. You're trudging through the sooty haze of an East London street, your scarf pressed against your nose to block the stench of coal and sweat. The clatter of looms spills from nearby factories, where you've just finished a grueling shift as a weaver, a new job to supplement your governess wages. As an unmarried woman in Victorian England, you're no stranger to suspicion, but here, among the factory's din, you're feared for a new reason. As a single worker, you're blamed for stirring unrest, a spinster who might incite rebellion or tempt male co-workers. A foreman, Mr. Griggs, glares as you pass, his moustache twitching as if you're plotting to burn the place down. You mutter, "If I'm a rebel, my only crime is wanting a lunch break." The fear is palpable, and it's rooted in your refusal to fit the married mould. Factories are the pulse of industrial London, and you're one of thousands of women feeding their machines, but your single status sets you apart. Married women work beside you, their wages tied to husbands' incomes, their lives anchored by home. You, with no man to tame you, are seen as volatile, a spark that could ignite strikes or scandal. You've heard whispers at the looms. Spinsters like you are trouble, too free, too bold. You're just trying to earn enough for rent and Pip's milk, but Mr. Griggs's scowl says you're a threat to order. You think, if I'm dangerous, it's only to his awful coffee breath. Here's a mainstream fact. By the 1860s, women made up nearly a third of Britain's factory workforce, with over 500,000 employed in textiles alone, according to factory inspectors' reports. Single women like you were common, drawn to urban jobs as rural work dried up. But employers and reformers feared unmarried workers, believing they fueled labour unrest or moral decay. Your weaving earns you 12 shillings a week, barely enough. After rent, but it's your independence, no husband, no children, that makes you suspect. Mr. Griggs watches you like you're planning a riot, when all you want is to finish your shift and collapse. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some factory owners distributed morality guides to single women workers, pamphlets urging modesty to protect male colleagues. You found one stuffed in your locker, its pages preaching against idle chatter and bold glances. You snorted, imagining yourself seducing the looms with a wink. "If I'm a temptress," you whisper, dodging a cart, "I'm failing spectacularly." You kept the pamphlet for kindling, but it's a reminder. Your spinsterhood isn't just a personal choice, it's a public menace threatening the factory's fragile harmony. Historians still argue whether single factory workers were genuinely disruptive or scapegoated for broader tensions. Some say your freedom alarmed employers who saw you as potential union agitators or moral risks. Others argue you were convenient targets, blamed for systemic issues like low wages or overcrowding. You feel the blame, Mr. Griggs's glares, the whispers from married co-workers who clutch their shawls when you pass. You're not organizing strikes or flirting with foremen, you're just weaving cloth to survive. But your presence, untethered by a man's name, makes you a symbol of chaos in their eyes. You reach the factory gate, the evening air cool but heavy with soot. Your hands ache from the looms, your back stiff, but you're free for now. You think of the townhouse, Mrs. Langley's suspicious eyes, and the church's sermons, all echoing the same fear. You don't belong. The factory's no different. Its rules and glares another cage. You picture Pip napping on your bed and smile. He's the only one who doesn't care about your marital status. You pull your scarf tighter and head home, your steps weary but defiant, a spinster weaving her own path through a world that dreads her freedom. You're kneeling in the pew of a draughty London church, the smell of damp hymnals and beeswax thick in the air, your gloved hands folded tightly in your lap. It's Sunday, and the vicar's voice booms from the pulpit, railing against wayward souls who shirk domestic duty. His eyes seem to linger on you, an unmarried woman, a spinster who's become a quiet symbol of moral failure in Victorian England. The congregation shifts, their whispers like rustling leaves, and you feel the weight of their judgment. You adjust your bonnet, muttering, "If I'm a sinner, it's for skipping his dreadful tea socials." The church's reproach is relentless, painting you as a threat for daring to live without a husband's name. Religion is the heartbeat of this society, and you're out of step. You've attended services since childhood, but now, at 28, your single status makes you a target. The vicar, Mr. Thorne, preaches that women are meant for marriage and motherhood, God's design for order. Your refusal, or inability, to conform brands you as defiant, a crack in the divine plan. Mrs. Langley, your employer at the townhouse, sits a few pews ahead, her head high, no doubt pleased you're getting a sermon's worth of correction. You'd rather be home with Pip, your tabby, than endure another lecture on your barren life. You think, if God's upset, he can send me a better landlady first. Here's a mainstream fact. Victorian England's evangelical revival, peaking in the 1850s and 60s, reinforced strict gender roles, with the Church of England preaching marriage as a woman's sacred duty. Spinsters like you were often singled out in sermons, their independence seen as a rejection of biblical ideals like Eve's submission. Mr. Thorne's words echo this, urging women to fulfill their purpose lest they tempt chaos. You're not anti-religion, you pray, you give alms, but the Church's insistence that your life is incomplete without a husband feels like a personal rebuke, one you hear every Sunday. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorian clergymen distributed pamphlets warning against spinsters' spiritual decay, claiming solitude bred sinful thoughts. You found one slipped under your boarding house door, its title screaming, "The Perils of the Unwed Heart." You laughed, imagining Mr. Thorne, scribbling it by candlelight, picturing you plotting rebellion over tea. "If my heart's decaying," you whisper, "it's from his dull sermons." You tucked the pamphlet in a drawer, half tempted to use it as kindling. It's absurd, but it fuels the fear that your single life isn't just wrong. It's a danger to souls. Historians still argue whether the Church's reproach was meant to control women or genuinely save them. Some say it was a patriarchal tool, shaming spinsters like you to preserve male authority. Others argue it reflected sincere belief that marriage was God's will, and your solitude a tragedy to be fixed. You feel the control, Mr. Thorne's pointed stares, the congregation's murmurs, Mrs. Langley's smug nod. They don't see you, just a spinster who's failed her purpose. You're not plotting sin, just trying to pay rent and teach Latin, but the Church casts you as a cautionary tale, a woman who might lead others astray. You shift in the pew, the wood creaking, and glance at the stained glass window, its saints glowing in the dim light. You think of Mrs. Hodges's witchy whispers, the charity tea snubs, the novel's villainous spinsters. They all blend into this moment, the Church's voice loudest of all, branding you a moral outlier. You're tired of it, but you bow your head, feigning prayer, your heart stubborn. Service ends and you file out, the cold air a relief. You'll face Mr. Thorne's sermons again, but for now you're free, walking home to Pip, your books, and a life that's yours, no matter how much they fear it. You're seated in the dim, musty parlour of a London charity house, the air heavy with the scent of boiled cabbage and wax polish. Your hands rest on a patched skirt, and you're here to collect a small basket of coal and bread, a grudging gift from the Ladies' Benevolent Society. As an unmarried woman in Victorian England, you're no stranger to pity, but this aid comes with strings, expectations of gratitude, conformity, and a quiet life that doesn't alarm anyone. The Society's matron, Mrs. Vance, peers at you over her spectacles, her smile as thin as her tea. You're a spinster, and your reliance on charity fuels their fear. You're a loose thread in their tidy social fabric. You clutch the basket, muttering, "If I'm a threat, it's only to their stale scones." Charity is a lifeline, but it's also a leash. Your governess work and factory shifts cover rent, but a recent illness drained your savings, forcing you to swallow your pride and accept help. Mrs. Vance drones about proper conduct, hinting you should marry or join a convent to settle your status. You nod, biting back a quip about her lumpy knitting, but the message is clear. Aid comes with a demand to fit in. You're not ungrateful, but you hate the way they see you as a problem to fix, a spinster whose independence might inspire others to stray. You think, If I wanted chains, I'd have married that banker Clara raved about. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, charity organisations, often run by middle-class women, provided relief to the poor, but prioritised deserving cases, widows or orphans over spinsters like you. By the 1860s, groups like the Charity Organisation Society vetted applicants suspicious of single women who seemed too independent. Your annuity and jobs make you less pitiable, but Mrs. Vance still treats you like a wayward soul, a coal, a bribe to keep you meek. You're one of thousands relying on such aid, but your unmarried status marks you as a risk, a woman who might disrupt the social order they're desperate to preserve. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some charity societies forced spinsters to wear badge dresses, plain garments marking them as aid recipients, to discourage pride. Mrs. Vance hasn't gone that far, but she did hand you a drab shawl with your basket, her eyes daring you to refuse. You took it, imagining Pip shredding it into a nest. If this is humility, you whisper, I'd rather freeze. You kept the shawl for kindling, a small rebellion against their attempt to dress you in shame. It's a petty rule, but it feeds the fear. You're not just needy, you're defiant, a spinster who might reject their control. Historians still argue whether charity was a genuine safety net or a tool to enforce social norms. Some say it offered spinsters like you a chance to survive, albeit with strings. Others argue it was a trap, tying you to gratitude and surveillance to prevent dangerous independence. You feel the trap. Mrs. Vance's lectures, the expectation to attend her sewing circle, the shawl's subtle humiliation. You're not here to upend society just to keep your room warm and Pip fed, but your need exposes you to their judgment. You wonder if Mrs. Langley or Mrs. Hodges would be kinder if they saw you here, or if they'd just whisper louder. You rise, the basket heavy in your arms, and thank Mrs. Vance, your voice steady despite the churn in your stomach. The parlours. Gloom follows you out, the street cold but freer. You think of the factory's looms, the townhouse's glares, the church's sermons, all part of the same fear that you, a spinster, don't belong. The coal will burn, the bread will fill you, but you'll keep your pride, your books, your stubborn heart. You head home, the gas lamps flickering, Pip waiting, and you're still you, unmarried, unbowed, and unafraid of their charity's chains. You're standing in a cramped London meeting hall, the air thick with the scent of ink and damp wool, your hands clutching a stack of pamphlets you've helped print. The hall buzzes with voices, women mostly, discussing votes, wages, and education. You're part of a small reformist group, a gathering of bold souls pushing for women's rights, and as an unmarried woman in Victorian England, your involvement alarms the traditionalists. You're a spinster, and your voice, raised in defiance of the status quo, makes you a feared figure, a woman who might unravel the fabric of their rigid world. You adjust your shawl, muttering, if I'm a revolutionary, my weapon's a very dull pen. But the stakes feel high, and your presence here is a quiet rebellion. This group, the Women's Progress League, is your secret refuge. You joined after a factory shift, drawn by a flyer promising a future for all women. You're no firebrand, just tired of Mrs. Langley's glares and Mrs. Vance's charity shawls, but speaking out, even in this small hall, marks you as dangerous. The League's leader, Miss Harrow, praises your knack for organising, but you've heard whispers outside. Spinsters like you are agitators, stirring unrest by daring to demand more. You think of Pip, napping at home, and smile. He's the only one unbothered by your newfound boldness. If I start a riot, you whisper, he'll sleep through it. Here's a mainstream fact. By the 1860s, early feminist movements in Britain, like the Langham Place group, were gaining traction advocating for women's education, employment, and suffrage. Unmarried women with fewer domestic ties were often at the forefront, their independence fueling both their activism and society's fear. You're not marching yet. Suffrage is decades off, but your work with the League, printing pamphlets, or debating property laws challenges the idea that women belong only in homes. The traditionalists, from Mr. Thorne to Mrs. Carver, see you as a threat, a spinster whose ideas could inspire others to question their roles. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Victorian newspapers ran cartoons depicting spinster reformers as bespectacled, harridans wielding umbrellas like swords, toppling marriage and morality. You saw one in a discarded paper, the spinster's face eerily like yours, captioned "The Unwed Uprising." You laughed, imagining yourself brandishing your parasol at Mrs. Pritchard's teapot. "If I'm a harridan," you murmur, stacking pamphlets, "I need a sharper umbrella." It's absurd, but it captures the panic. Your activism, however, small, makes you a symbol of change, a spinster who might lead impressionable girls astray. Historians still argue whether spinster reformers were feared for their ideas or their defiance of gender norms. Some say your activism threatened patriarchal control, as independent women like you pushed for systemic change. Others argue the fear was exaggerated, a reaction to a few vocal spinsters amid broader social shifts. You feel the threat's weight. Miss Harrow warns of landlords evicting troublesome tenants, and Mrs. Pritchard's been colder since you started coming home late. You're not toppling empires, just handing out flyers, but your voice, your presence, unsettles a world that prefers you silent. You wonder if Mrs. Langley's read your pamphlets, her governess turned radical. You slip a pamphlet into your bag, the hall emptying as the meeting ends. The street outside is dark, the gas lamps dim, but your heart hums with purpose. You think of the charity tea snubs, the factory's glares, the witchy whispers, all part of the same fear that you, a spinster, dare to speak. You're not alone. Here, with Miss Harrow and the others, but you're still a target, your reformist role a spark in a tinderbox society. You pull your shawl tighter and head home, Pip waiting, your resolve a quiet fire against the chill of their dread. You're perched on a hard bench in a doctor's dimly lit consulting room, the air sharp with carbolic soap and the faint must of old books. Your hands twist in your lap, your patched skirt brushing the floor, as Dr. Harrowby, a stern man with mutton chops, scribbles notes. You're here for a nagging cough, but he's more interested in your status. An unmarried woman in Victorian England, a spinster whose independence sparks suspicion. He peers over his glasses, suggesting your symptoms stem from hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis tied to your single life. You're feared not just for defying marriage, but for supposedly harboring a disordered mind, a threat to yourself and society. You swallow a retort, muttering, "If I'm hysterical, it's from your bill." The label stings, and it's part of why you're a figure of dread. Hysteria is the era's favorite excuse to pathologize women like you. Dr. Harrowby drones about nervous imbalance, claiming your unmarried state, lacking a husband's stabilizing influence, has unmoored your health. You've heard it before, from Mrs. Pritchard's gossip to pamphlets at church, all warning that spinsters risk mental chaos. You're 28, juggling governess work, factory shifts and reformist meetings, and your cough is likely from London's smog, not a loveless heart. But the doctor's verdict paints you as a walking ailment, your independence a disease. You think, if my mind's unhinged, it's from dodging Mrs. Langley's glares all day. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, hysteria was a common diagnosis for women, especially unmarried ones. with doctors like those in the 1860s Royal Medical Society linking it to unnatural lifestyles. Treatments ranged from rest cures to bizarre remedies like electric shocks or cold baths. You're lucky Dr. Harrowby only prescribes a tonic and calm pursuits, but his tone implies marriage would fix you better. The label reinforces society's fear. Your single life isn't just odd, it's a medical risk potentially contagious to other women who might shun domesticity. You're not raving, just tired, but hysteria makes you a case study in their eyes. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some doctors claimed spinsters' hysteria could be cured by pelvic massage, a euphemism for manual stimulation practiced in clinics with unsettling regularity. You overheard a maid whisper about it at the boarding house, her giggles masking horror. You nearly choked, imagining Dr. Harrowby suggesting it with his dour face. "I'd rather cough forever," you whisper, clutching your shawl. The idea's absurd, but it underscores the fear. Your body, unbound by marriage, is a problem to be fixed. A spinster's mind and flesh suspect in a world obsessed with control. Historians still argue whether hysteria diagnoses were medical, misogyny, or genuine attempts to understand women's health. Some say they were tools to enforce conformity, pathologizing spinsters like you to keep women in line. Others argue doctors, limited by science, believed they were helping, however. Misguided. You feel the misogyny, Dr. Harrowby's smug diagnosis, his hint that a husband would settle you. You're not sick in the head, just sick of being told your life's a disorder. You want to argue, to point to your reformist pamphlets, or Pip's purring loyalty, but you nod, take the tonic, and plan to toss it in the Thames. You leave the office, the street cold and buzzing with evening hawkers. Your cough lingers, but your resolve doesn't. You think of the factory's looms, the charity's shawls, the novel's villainous spinsters, all part of the same fear that you, unmarried, are a glitch in their system. Dr. Harrowby's just another voice in the chorus, but you're not listening. You pull your scarf tighter, the gas lamps guiding you home to Pip, your books, your small, defiant life. You're no hysteric, just a woman breathing through the smog, your heart steady, despite their diagnoses and dread. You're pacing the narrow hallway of your boarding house, the floorboards groaning under your boots, a letter from your aunt clutched in your hand. It's a rare missive, urging you to visit her in Bath, but its postscript stings. A husband would secure your future, dear. The air smells of stale tea and Mrs. Pritchard's lavender polish, but your mind is on the legal limbo that defines your life as an unmarried woman in Victorian England. Without a husband's name, you lack rights over property, money, even your own choices, and this vulnerability fuels society's fear. Your independence is a crack in their rigid system, a spinster who might demand more than she's allowed. You fold the letter, muttering, "If I'm a menace, it's for wanting to keep my own shillings." The stakes are high, and your lack of legal standing makes you a quiet threat. Your life is a tightrope of legal constraints. Your small annuity, inherited from your father, is yours by luck, but you can't own property, sign contracts, or even challenge a debt without a male guardian. Your reformist meetings whisper of change, petitions for married women's property rights, but as a spinster, you're invisible to the law. Mrs. Langley, your governess employer, once docked your pay for a broken teacup, knowing you couldn't protest. You're not plotting rebellion, just surviving, but your existence, unbound by a man's authority, sparks unease. You think, if I'm lawless, it's only because their laws ignore me. Here's a mainstream fact. In Victorian England, the legal system, codified by acts like the 1839 Custody of Infants Act, stripped unmarried women of nearly all rights, treating them as wards of fathers or brothers until marriage transferred. Control to husbands. By the 1860s, spinsters like you had no claim to property or legal personhood, making you dependent on goodwill or wages. Your governess job and factory shifts keep you afloat, but one misstep, an eviction, a false debt, could ruin you without recourse. Society fears you not just for your freedom, but because your legal limbo hints at a world where women might demand equality, unsettling their patriarchal order. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some spinsters exploited legal loopholes like fee-me, soul, status, to run businesses under rare municipal grants, dodging male oversight. You heard of a Bristol spinster who sold jam under such a license, her stall a local legend. You imagine yourself peddling lace, free of Mrs. Pritchard's rent hikes and grin. I jam their laws right back, you whisper, tucking the letter away. It's a pipe dream, you've no such license, but the tale feeds the fear. Spinsters like you, given a sliver of power, might carve out lives that challenge the status quo. Historians still argue whether legal restrictions on spinsters were deliberate oppression or a byproduct of patriarchal tradition. Some say they were designed to force women into marriage, making independence untenable. Others argue the system simply ignored you, assuming all women would wed. You feel the oppression, Mrs. Langley's docked pay, your aunt's veiled warning, the law's silence on your rights. You're not rallying for votes yet, but your reformist pamphlets dream of a day when you're not a legal ghost. Your independence, fragile as it is, makes you a symbol of what could be, and that's why they dread you. You pause by your room's door, the boarding house quiet, save for Pip's faint purr inside. You think of Dr. Harraby's hysteria, nonsense, the charity's shawls, the factory's glares, all tied to this legal void that leaves you vulnerable yet defiant. Your aunt's letter lies heavy, but you won't bend, not yet. You slip inside, light a candle, and settle near Pip, your heart steady. The law may not see you, but you see yourself, a spinster, scraping by, dreaming of a world where your life isn't a threat, but a right. You're sitting by the small, cracked window of your boarding house room, the faint glow of a single candle casting soft shadows across the walls. The air carries the familiar scent of damp plaster and the lavender you sprinkle on your pillow, and outside, London's hum has faded to a distant murmur. You're 28, an unmarried woman, a spinster, and you're reflecting on the life you've carved through Victorian England's maze of fear and judgment. From Mrs. Hodges's witchy whispers to Dr. Harraby's hysteria nonsense, you've faced a world that dreads your independence, seeing you as a threat to its rigid order. Yet here you are with Pip purring on your bed, your reformist pamphlets tucked away, your heart stubborn and unbroken. You smile, muttering, "If I'm a danger, it's only to their terrible tea." Your journey, fraught but yours, is a quiet triumph. You think back to the foggy alleys where you dodged superstitious taunts, the charity teas where Mrs. Carver's snubs cut deep, the factory looms where Mr. Griggs saw you as a rebel. Each moment tested you, but you kept walking through the church's sermons, the law's silence, the novel's villainous spinsters, your governess work, your lace mending, your league meetings. They're not just survival, they're defiance. Proof you can live without a husband's name. You're not Clara, with her banker and broom moustache, nor Mrs. Langley, guarding her domestic throne. You're you, a woman who's learned to navigate fear and turn it into strength. You think, if Pip's my only legacy, he's a better one than most. Here's a mainstream fact. By the late 1860s, spinsters like you were slowly reshaping Victorian society, their growing numbers, over 1.5 million unmarried women by 1871, pushing for reforms in education, work, and rights. Your pamphlets, your league, are part of this shift, a ripple that will one day swell into suffrage and beyond. You're not famous, just a weaver, a governess, a voice in a hall, but your life challenges the idea that women must wed to matter. Society fears you for this, but you see it as a spark, a legacy of quiet rebellion that might light the way for others. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some spinsters left legacy gifts, like recipe books or embroidered samplers, to nieces or friends, passing on wisdom outside traditional family lines. You've started a journal, scribbling thoughts between shifts, notes on reform, sketches of Pip, even a sarcastic ode to Mrs. Pritchard's teapot. You imagine it in a girl's hands someday, a reminder that spinsters weren't witches or hysterics, just women who lived. You grin, picturing Mrs. Vance clutching her pearls at your subversive scribbles. "If this is my crime," you whisper, "I'll write another page." Historians still argue whether spinsters like you were feared for their potential or their reality. Some say your independence threatened a system built on male control, a warning of what women could become. Others argue the fear was fleeting, overshadowed by pity or reform's rise. You feel the potential, every glare, every whisper, from Mrs. Hodges to Mr. Thorne, confirms you're a glitch they can't ignore. You're not toppling empires, just living, and that's enough to shift the ground. Your legacy isn't grand, but it's yours, a life that says spinsters aren't threats, they're possibilities. You lean back, the candle's flame steady, and let your thoughts drift. The boarding house creaks, Pips purr a soft hum, and you feel peace, a rare gift in this city's clamour. You've faced their fear and found your place, a spinster who's more than their stories. The night deepens and you're ready for tomorrow. More looms, more Latin, more dreams. And now let's ease you into rest. Picture a quiet London street, the gas lamps dim, the air cool with evening mist. You're walking home, your steps slow, the city's weight lifting like a sigh. The stars peek through the smog, faint but steady. And the world feels gentle, wrapping you in its calm. Your room waits Pip's warmth, the journal's blank pages all yours. Let your breath soften, your heart settle. Each moment a lullaby. The city sleeps, and so can you, held by the strength you've built, dreaming of a world that's kinder. Good night, sweet soul, until the dawn. Sweet dreams.